Hi, and welcome to the Roadmap to a Zero Trust Security Model, a cybersecurity thought leadership podcast from HMG Strategy and Okta. So Nick, in previous segments, you had shared with us why companies are adopting zero trust security models. And you'd also offered recommendations on how to go about implementing a zero trust security model. Once organizations have gotten to that point, can you share with us recommendations for keeping zero trust security models fresh and keeping them moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads me to bring up the first point, which I think is critical, and that the zero trust is not a state or a thing that you suddenly achieve and you check the box and you say, hey, now we have achieved zero trust and we're ready to move on to the next thing. It's more a philosophy. It's more an approach for how you think about security. So it is definitely something that needs to be an ongoing practice of keeping up with either trends in your industry or the evolution of your business goals and how that maps to the zero trust architectures that you've built and the technologies you've deployed and the processes that you've put in place. So I will say that, for many, it is a phased approach. A lot of the things I talked about in the last session, such as going to a passwordless model for authentication, are things that very few organizations have fully realized today, especially across all their critical resources. We see a pretty distinct maturity model of embracing zero trust access technologies in organizations. And it does start with sort of a foundational deployment of identity and access management, single sign-on across your entire workforce, not just employees, but also your contractors, your partners, deploying MFA, unifying those policies across not just applications, but also servers and other critical resources, and then starting to layer in context. So we talked last time about looking at device context, network context, location context, and setting policies to better align that user experience to the risk when you're accessing sensitive resources from different locations, different devices, et cetera. And so we then we often see organizations start to deploy those access controls to things like APIs, scoping them appropriately so that, there's not abuse of APIs that are often the modern building blocks of applications, and it can lead to significant data leakage if they're not secured properly. So these are all things that are coming in phases, and then we look at organizations who are saying, okay, now that I've deployed some of that, I want to further take steps to align that user experience to the risk, remove passwords maybe in lower risk scenarios, start to think about more continuous and adaptive authentication and authorization approach, and taking a more of a risk-based approach to those access policies, looking at the overall risk of that authentication attempt based on a variety of different inputs from either your IAM vendor or external vendors as well. So it's a phased approach, which means that there is often a stage that organizations are going towards, especially because we're talking often to large organizations with a hybrid infrastructure of on-premise resources and cloud resources. And so there's often a stage of getting some of your legacy on-prem resources folded into your zero trust strategy for access management, and also starting to plug in other critical resources around that. And I would say even beyond just the technology phases, staying on top of the evolving trends in your space. I mean, today we're seeing some rapid evolution of things like what's happening in the healthcare space around the rapid move to telemedicine, right? How do we start to enable doctors and physicians to be quickly provisioned with the applications they need to engage with those customers, to be quickly authenticated and authorized to use those in a way that is secure and maybe not reliant on them being on the corporate network. And so zero trust plays a big role in that. We see similar things in other industries like manufacturing around a quickly evolving supply chain, where maybe your supply chain from certain countries is being disrupted and you need to quickly, in an agile way, embrace a new set of suppliers. And so zero trust isn't just about your employees and contractors, but also about the partners you work for. How do you authenticate and authorize maybe new third parties that you're bringing on? And so we see a lot of different ways that customers start to deploy that. A common one is sort of a bring your own ID, or even leveraging inbound federation from third parties, whereby you trust the authentication of trusted third parties before they can access your resources. And so we have a lot of documentation and case studies on how we're applying zero trust principles, and our customers apply zero trust principles to more B2B use cases. But we're seeing that evolve quickly in certain industries where things like supply chains or researchers that you're collaborating with, you need to spin up portals for them to access and put all your applications into that one portal for them to access securely and authenticate and authorize. So I would say it's a lot around just staying in touch with the evolving trends in your industry and applying those zero trust principles to that. I'll also say that, when it comes to keeping your zero trust strategy going, we almost see, without exception, organizations taking a best of breed mentality to the technologies they deploy to support that strategy. There's lots of innovation across more emerging as well as established security vendors out there. So staying on top of the new capabilities around machine learning based techniques or other ways to provide secure access in a way that doesn't introduce new friction is something just to keep on top of. How does that fold into your security stack, and not being too reliant on one monolithic vendor to provide this your whole zero trust approach, but rather this is really inherently a best of breed strategy. And then again, as we talked about a bit last time, in your goal of keeping this strategy going in a recurring way, documenting, evaluating, adapting, documentation is really key, right? Especially in what's going on right now, and understanding like rapid changes that you're deploying. How has it been working? What changes do you want to make medium term to long term? And having clear communication with your users and IT teams, training, doing security, ongoing security trainings for things like phishing, which we're seeing a big spike in now. Always a best practice, right? And then the last thing I'll talk about is really positioning zero trust to the business in the right way. Even the term zero trust can be problematic if you're pitching it to your CEO or it's going to a board level discussion. It implies a lack of trust of your users in many ways, but and your employees. But really, we need to position this, whatever you call it, as a business enablement philosophy, whereby it's going to allow the organization to embrace new technologies quickly and achieve business outcomes. So mapping the zero trust initiatives to those business outcomes that are going to resonate with the internal decision makers up the chain, things like more business agility, allow us to be more collaborative by rolling out new collaboration technologies quickly and let people use them on any device. It's going to help us move to the cloud quickly and do it more securely, which is going to allow us to be more competitive in the market and do everything in a way that is secure, in a way that also enables us to achieve those business outcomes. So I would say those are some tips on how to keep your zero trust strategy going, and not treating it as a thing you check the box on, but rather it's a philosophy and a mentality that you carry with you.
Nick, thanks for sharing all these great insights today with us. This concludes the Roadmap to a Zero Trust Security Model, a cybersecurity thought leadership podcast from HMG Strategy and Okta. And please be sure to join us for our upcoming webinar with Okta entitled Not All Rip and Replace: How to Successfully Transition to a Modern Infrastructure, taking place on May 5th. Please follow us there. And from everyone on the team, thanks and have a great day.